Good evening and welcome to this February 24th, 2020 Council Work Session. And our first item of interest, item on the agenda is Town Square Project Funding Strategies. Manager?
Thank you. So this work session is a follow-up from the one we had about a week ago, a little bit over a week ago, where we gave you an update on the Town Square projects, and there were some questions that were related to wanting some more clarity on the process generally, how construction processes work, and then some discussion around funding and whether you wanted to set a cap, not set a cap, but understand what would be the possibilities, because we all know that we don't have enough funding secured at this moment to pull off all of that. So we've worked pretty fast over the last week to come to you and just kind of talk generally about both projects and what some potential funding sources would be. So I think what I'll do is just turn it over to Will and Twyla because they have the meat of the information, and then we'll kind of see where that goes, and I'll close this out.
Great.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Will Dowdy in Community Development. So thinking about a construction process, I know that you have seen this in other ways, but I wanted to just put it out again as a reminder of the different phases that a construction process goes through and talk a little bit about the relationship between them. We started off the town square work with a concept design for the entire town square, but and that was to create the an overarching vision to talk about how the different pieces relate to one another. But as we move into the design process, each part of that gets kind of its own concept design phase, and that's a time to just investigate the program, to make sure that we have the right constraints, understanding of the site, and an understanding of what the targets are. And so one example of that for the City Hall was the recent actions that you took the other night, helping clarify what it is that this building is. But it's creating guidelines before you get into specifics about design. The next major phase of the process is schematic design, where it really is developing the scheme. It's developing the outline for what you want the design to be. And typically, a schematic design phase ends with a picture that is worthy of the front page of the paper. It's you can put it on your, you could put it on the brochure. This is, you can understand what the concept is, and you can understand what the end result is going to look like. There's still a lot of work to be done in developing that design, but the core of it is there. And that's also the point when the contractor can understand the project enough to give you a reasonable cost estimate, a fairly specific cost estimate, because they understand all of the pieces and parts that are going into the building. The next phase is really developing that design, and when it's done kind of in a pure process, the design work actually is pretty much finished when you get to the end of this design development phase. It's figuring out all of the final materials and all of the final equipment and making sure all of the details are figured out. And so with that again comes another cost estimate, but that allows you to transition into construction documents. At which point the design team is really just communicating. The construction documents becomes an opportunity to make sure that the city and the building and permit team and the contractor and the subcontractors understand the building well enough for the different parts to do their job. So whether that's the city to approve the building as a buildable, safe building, or the contractor to say, I fully understand this building well enough to build it in the same way that the architect thinks it will be built. That's the purpose of that construction document phase. And as I've alluded to, that allows the contractor and the subcontractors to bid the project to the final level of specificity, because at that point they understand everything about the project, and they can provide the number that they will do the work for. And that leads us right into construction. So that's the idea of a process run very linearly. But what happens as you go through that is that each phase of this, the lines between them are a little bit fuzzier. And that's because when the architect or the landscape architect has finished one phase of it, say the schematic design phase, that's when they turn that work over and start reviewing it with the key stakeholders. And so that we have periodic check-ins during that time, but that becomes a major milestone for them to communicate that work with with us as the client. We talk with the key stakeholders. We talk at the city. We've got a number of people who have a technical understanding of the project and the project needs. So whether that's EPD, looking at the design for the park blocks and farmers market to make sure that it's safe, or the city manager's office looking at the internal workings of the city hall office space to make sure that it meets their needs. There's lots of different people who we bring in to review the designs and review the plans and then provide that comment. And then, like I said, there's that opportunity for the contractor and the contractor's team to start reviewing the drawings. They ask questions, and then they finally are in a position where they can start putting numbers to it. And so all of that takes time. And so there's this tail that follows after each one of these phases, kind of the core part of the phase, and then there's this tail that runs out where you have review and you have discussion and you have refinement, and then you get that cost estimate. And so during that time, the next phase begins carefully and making sure that there's still time to start incorporating that feedback. But you see one phasing out and the other one beginning, and so you have that very iterative process and very kind of blended process as you move through that. So what all of this allows us to do is to take a project and to have multiple times where we get to come back and as a client, we get to look at the work and we get to bring it to you for you to see where we are, and we have the multiple check-ins. Throughout all of this, we are working, in addition to our typical process where we're working with an architect and landscape architect. We have our owner's rep, that's Shields Opalist Johnson, and you've met Francesca Gambetti. And she is helping us work through all of this and to make sure that that as we go through these different phases, we are looking for the right things. We've got the process in as streamlined a way as possible, and also that we're tracking costs and other buildable things, or questions of buildability as we work through it, to make sure that this process, through all of its iterations, is still focused and zeroing in on something that, in the end, meets the expectations that we have. Meets the expectations that we have. So that's I wanted to show that to you, and then point out that for the park blocks and farmers market work, which is what I want to talk about first, we're at we're in the schematic design phase, and we're at a point where we're starting to review documents and drawings that have been created by the landscape architect and their team, and then that is something that we are after we review and we get to the contractor, we'll be back in April to have cost estimates and a full schematic design package for you to review. So this is a site that hopefully you are quite familiar with at this point. I know I am. And the vision that we've talked about is to do a pretty significant transformation in all these different corners of this town square. And so the park blocks on the south side, the farmers market on the side of the butterfly lot, the city hall, and the north end of the butterfly lot. One of the things that I've done in this is I've pulled out the area that's right of way, just as a name up there, and with the dollar amount, which is approximate. These are what I shared with you in the past was approximately $25 million cost of the park blocks and farmers market, and in this I have made an estimate of how much of that would be attributed to right of way. No new information, just separating it out a little bit. Like I said, until we have the contractor's numbers, I don't have any further refinements of what that would be, whether that number goes up, down, or stays exactly the same. This is a pretty simple slide. There's two ways to to think about what do you do if your costs are more than the funds that you have, and one is to find other opportunities for revenue, and Twyla's going to be talking about that in a minute. The other is to look at the scope of the project and either to change what the scope is or change how you phase it. So this would be an example of something that we could probably do with the existing funds. It's not, again, without specific numbers, I don't know what's possible, but Public Works is doing a project on 8th Avenue, And so with funds from Public Works, we could construct the 8th Avenue portion of the town square to connect in with the work that they're going to do on either end. With the with aggregating all of the urban renewal funds, and in addition to some of the other sources we have, like money from Lane County, we probably have the right amount of money to do the farmers market space, the farmers market pavilion, and the plaza space around it. And so that would be an example of a phase one if you wanted to move forward with a smaller scope or a smaller phase initially to stay within the funds that are available at this point. You add the City Hall piece on top of that, it would look like that. So speaking of City Hall, as we've been telling you throughout this process, City Hall is a little bit farther behind in its process, and so it is just now beginning to come into the schematic design phase. So there's still more work to be done there. The information that the direction that you provided earlier this month helps the team figure out what their path is for that schematic design. So again, a little bit farther behind, and our intention is to come back to you in June or thereabouts with the full schematic design package and costs for you to review. And now I'll turn it over to Twyla to talk about the revenue side of things.
Good evening. So I'm Twyla Miller, the Finance Director, and I gave you a couple of documents this afternoon, rather late in the day, so they're at your places as well, so I wanted to walk through those really quickly. The first is related to the Comcast funds and the reserve for revenue shortfall. And when we talk about reserves and sources of funds, I just wanted to give a clear picture. Many things have happened over the years to talk about those funds and how they relate to the reserve for revenue shortfall in the general fund. So in FY18 on Supplemental Budget 1, $16.5 million was placed in the reserve for revenue shortfall. That at that time, the reserve was about $20.6 million as a result of all those actions. And then soon thereafter, Council allocated another $1 million specifically from those funds for shelter options as part of the budget process that year. Since that time, many actions there on your document there have happened. So some are supplemental budget actions, some are budget committee actions, others are actions as part of the proposed budget that comes to budget committee and council in the spring. And so the document that you have there kind of shows the different pieces. Some are one-time, some are ongoing. The majority of them are one-time dollars. And on the back of that page, you can see with the supplemental budget action as part of the FY20 supplemental budget in December, as a result of all those actions, including the loan for community safety, the reserve for revenue shortfall is about $16.6 million. So that doesn't include repayment of the loan. We'll repay the loan next year. So I wanted to just give some context to the reserve and Comcast. The other document you have gives a little more information. The slide here shows many options. So before your February 10th work session, we'll have sent out a document that listed potential funding options. These are the options really that, for a project like this, they're kind of the typical items that we look at and talk about over time. What I'll talk about here today is just a really high-level, kind of back-of-the-napkin estimate for some of those options. We haven't done a deep dive or analysis, so certainly if you wanted to take a more closer look in the future, we would kind of dial in that analysis as we go. So I'll just walk through these one at a time. So the first is asset sales. So current assets that can be sold really are parking garages or surface lots. It's estimated that the Pearl Street garage could be sold for about $2.5 million. And the corner surface lot here right across the street could be sold for approximately $1 million. So challenges when we look at selling parking structures and infrastructure, parking mobility is critical, right, to our downtown and our economic vitality. And we do use all 6 structures and lots. The sale of parking property would have an impact, too, to the parking fund with the loss of revenues, with those revenue generators being gone. Next, we'll talk about downtown urban renewal funds. So in the downtown district, the urban renewal plan could be amended to add additional projects, including City Hall, and increase the maximum indebtedness. So the urban renewal district could then obtain bank financing to address any funding gap moving forward. The downtown district is set to terminate after sufficient funds have been collected to pay for allowable projects. So if you added projects to the district would not terminate until we collected sufficient revenues. We estimate at a high level for every additional $10 million we'd borrow in the downtown district, it would add about 5 years to that time horizon. So challenges here, this would require a type 1 amendment. It would take 6 to 9 months to complete that after council took action. The amendment would be processed through an ordinance that would be subject to referendum. And this action would also require concurrence from our overlapping tax jurisdictions, so for folks like 4J. The next item on the list is donations. So community members could be asked to provide donations for portions of the project. The amount that could be raised from such an effort is currently unknown, but it's likely not a significant funding source when you look at the funding needed for the overall project. The farmers market or park blocks may have a higher likelihood of achieving donations or naming rights for those portions of the project. And then another one is energy incentives. So these would be pursued regardless where it was appropriate for parts of the project. So that wouldn't really be enough to address the funding gap or a significant part of the funding strategy. And then the general capital transfer allocation. So as part of the base budget for general capital, there's a $3.4 million annual transfer from the general fund. This is separate. It's part of the base budget. It's not part of the marginal beginning working capital transfer you see on supplemental budget 1. So if you were to take $500,000 of that annual allocation out of their base budget, you could issue full faith and credit bonds for 20 years and raise about $6 or $7 million from that bond issuance. Full faith and credits are a little different than a GEO bond, so we're not pledging unlimited tax authority to pay back the debt, and they don't need to go on the ballot. However, there's a challenge also here. So when you think about general fund buildings and maintaining our structures over time, it would constrain that ability. So a large component of our general fund facility inventory is significantly older, with the average age of general fund building being over 30 years old. So when you think about the risks there of not adequately funding your preservation, there's inadequate funding in it, as well as it increases costs over time as we push those costs out. Next, there's a general obligation bond. So the city could issue a general obligation bond. We did a quick back of the napkin for a $15 million bond. The cost to the typical home would be estimated at $15 to $20 on average per year over a 20-year time period for a 20-year bond. The challenge there would be, because it's a general obligation bond, it would need to go to the ballot and be approved, so there's a risk that that measure would not be approved by taxpayers. And then the general fund reserve. So the general fund reserve for revenue shortfall, it could be used beginning in FY22. You could take up to $1 million out of the reserve annually between FY22 and FY26. However, if you were to do that and nothing else changed, so all of our revenues and expenditures happened exactly as we have forecast them at a point in time, you would be at a 3.8% reserve by the end of the forecast period. If you took $500,000 annually from FY22 to FY26, same set of projections, your reserve target would be about 4.9, just under 5% at the same time period. Generally, we don't like to see folks take the reserve below that 5%. We like to have an adequate reserve for several reasons. One, it allows us to, our target is 8%, and it allows us to respond to unexpected events. So someday there will be a recession. We're not sure when or how deep. If an employer closes in town, if there's unfunded mandates, we've talked about the FCC action related to Comcast revenues. So all of those things are risks and uncertainties as we look to the future. So we'd like to have an adequate reserve level so that if something, but when something happens, we can actually take the time we need to develop a strategy and not have to immediately cut services to the public. Another important component to this is our bond rating. So the city is very highly rated. We have a AA1 bond rating from Moody's. One of the things they look to is our reserve levels and our financial management. And if we were to take our reserves below 5%, that would be a negative credit for the city. Our bond rating could go down, which would translate into higher borrowing costs for taxpayers in our community. And grants, there may be funds available from grants, but to date, none have been identified. So, staff are always looking for those opportunities. There's also the option of a local option capital property tax levy. So voters could authorize a levy for up to 10 years for a capital levy. This would count towards our Measure 5 tax limit. So when we look to compression, we've updated our compression numbers based on current tax information. There's about 61 cents left under the cap. However, if we were to provide debt service, a 10-year levy to provide debt service on banks financing, let's say for $15 million on the project, it would result in a levy of about $2 million annually, with the average cost to the medium home of $25 to $30 a year over the life of the levy. So again, this would have to go before the voters and be voted on. There's a risk that it wouldn't pass. The other pieces we think about is we have other levies that we, the city, may want to put on the ballot, such as for library and parks, and our partners out in the community, such as the county and 4J, also may have levies, which all of which the timing of those and then the impact on compression we would want to watch. So if you're looking between a GEO bond and a capital levy, I would definitely say a GEO bond, because then it's not interfering with compression issues in the cap. Next, somewhere we've looked over the years has been parking funds, to the extent that funds are available for capital projects. We could potentially look at some of those for the City Hall component of this. However, as part of the riverfront development discussions, that area will also need significant contributions from the parking funds in the next few years. So the parking program and funds, they're a pretty lean operation. They run at fairly thin margins. So if we were to move forward with this, it is likely that other capital projects for parking would have to be delayed. And then system development charges. SDCs, if available, would add additional park area, but would not be able to be utilized to cover any of the current funding gap. It would just add park capacity to the project. And then telecommunications funds. So we could use telecom funds to pay for new city technology-related projects, such as fiber, purchasing and installing telecommunications, and so on. In the City Hall Fund, we already have $2 million in telecom dollars as part of that base funding level. So we would want to see if there are other parts of the project in total that would qualify for some of those funds. So there may be funds available, but those funds would need to have a telecom nexus in order to be used. And also, when we would have to look at the health of the telecom fund a little more, depending on the dollar amount identified. There is a challenge that other telecom projects or equipment replacement may have to be delayed if we chose to use those telecom funds for other parts of the Town Square project. And then finally, the miscellaneous category. So we're always looking for one-time sources. So there may be other one-time funding opportunities that arise that we would look to. And there's also things like the use of marginal beginning working capital if available when it comes to council and supplemental budget. So those are the list of things we typically talk about and that we've gone through here today. I'm actually going to turn things back over to Sarah to wrap things up.
Did you have more you wanted to say, Will? Do you want to just flip it to the last slide? Yep. I realized I forgot to.
Oh, it doesn't really want to go.
Okay, that's fine. This is the last slide. You already did it. So that's kind of a big picture level, but with a little bit more detail than what was in your AIS in terms of like what are the reality of dollars that can be brought in. We have a lot more information on kind of even kind of general costs about the farmers market and the park blocks than we do so far for City Hall, but we've been operating under some of the same assumptions around size and costs as we were before, and knowing that we need to be really tight to a budget and to keep costs down. So It's harder to understand how to phase the City Hall project at this point because we've already been calling it Phase 1. But we just wanted to be able to provide this information and then remind you that we are on this, like, my last slide was the Rock Karen again, to just remind us that we're always trying to make sure you can see where we're going and where we've been in case we need to stop and get more information. And I think this work session was a stop. We need some more information. Anyway, I think we should open it up for questions and then kind of just see where you land.
I have Mike in the queue. Anybody else ready? Okay, Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciated your recognizing the 8%. We've heard that a few hundred times, and that's smart for all the reasons you mentioned. What's the number, the dollar number for 8% today under current budget?
I think it's about $13 million.
What do we have?
Right now, we have 16.6.
Okay. All right. It was interesting to me that you listed assets, but you only listed 2.
That was actually, so you can, I mean, council
think you
has
know
the
where I'm
authority to
going.
sell any piece of property. I was trying to give, like, here's some actual realistic property
Right.
that I know right now could be potentially sold. But of course, if you wanted to sell other assets, which could include other buildings, other parks, other whatever you own, you have the right to surplus that and do that.
Other land for housing?
What's that?
We own 53 acres that, as I understand it, maybe Denny can correct me here, but as I understand it, is zoned for housing above Laurelwood Golf Course. Am I wrong or right?
How the zoning, I mean, what's that?
I'm wondering how it's zoned. I thought it was for housing and that it's also,
Maybe it's underlying zoning. I'd be surprised if it's not zoned public lands right now.
is it a part of our buildable lands inventory?
No.
Okay, cool. Any idea of the value of that since the last time we talked about it?
Are you looking at me or Denny? It's really
Anybody,
hard to tell.
anybody that has a number?
Not off the top
No
of our
idea.
heads.
Okay.
No, we weren't prepared for that.
All right. Well, that's an asset too, that, I think we should have on the table in that discussion as well. When we passed the initial downtown urban renewal increment addition for fiber and for the parks and the market and so forth, it's my recollection, and this is where I need some guidance, correction, whatever you want to call it. It's my recollection that we passed that with a specific dollar amount set aside for each of those. I think there were 4 things, one of which was fiber, and we did that. That's awesome. What were the amounts set aside in that previous iteration that ended up at the ballot for farmers market, for the park blocks?
It didn't end up at the ballot, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so we had basically a not to exceed overall number and an up to on specific projects. So if you know the up to is off the top of your head.
So the farmer's market was up to $4 million, and there was already $500,000, so that created up to $4.5 million, and then up to $5.2 million for park blocks and other open space projects.
So we've got that 9, 10 planned for in the 25?
Yes, 1 million was spent on, approximately 1.2 million, I think, was spent on the acquisition of the south half of the butterfly lot.
Right.
But other than that, the rest of that is available.
So for the rest of the park block stuff and the farmer's market, we're still in need of 16, 17 million.
To implement the full project.
Yes, yeah, it's, there are a few other sources in there, but I believe it's something like 13 million.
And that's for the list. We've got to find it somewhere in this list, right?
Correct.
My recollection, and you're right, we didn't send that one to the ballot. That was the whole fight, was whether or not they could get it on the ballot or not. And my recollection was our promise in that process that we wouldn't put the city hall in that discussion as a way to increase downtown urban renewal. And I would think that there will be quite a number of people who will come out and remind us that we made this promise and that we wouldn't do that. And in the process of our conversations at
It's
this
actually
table.
in the plan itself.
Is it really?
It's a statement in the plan, and that would be something that would have to be amended.
And I remember the discussion with that whole carve out the corner and the heavy discussion we had around how we may not use that fund for City Hall. So that's good to know. I'm interested on a kind of tangential note, something that I read in the paper. Because I don't know the answer, and I should. I know we've talked about the county lot that exists over there across, 6th and Oak. But what's our plan for people being able, once this is revitalized, to come down and park downtown? Do we have one? Because we're going to lose a lot of parking places and have increased demand, hopefully. So how are people getting there?
Yep, and I would also mention, as you recall, you also have an approved work session poll to talk about expanding the downtown urban renewal district for convention center and parking. And so I wanted to mention that as well, as you start talking about these funding sources for Town Square, just a reminder of a placeholder that's a discussion too.
So parking solutions, we've talked a little bit about that at the council table. As we know, it's expensive to build, say, a new parking garage downtown. So in the interim, we're looking at other solutions. For example, we've secured a couple hundred parking spaces in the 13th and Olive parking garage, and we have an option to secure 200 more of those if the other ones fill up. So that's an interim solution. What we've done on the Old City Hall block is an interim solution. So we're also, but at the same time, we're also looking at some more permanent solutions, mostly on the east side of downtown. We've been talking with the county a little bit about the parking lot behind Aqua Bank, for example. Could that be a future site, and some other options? But none of them are cheap and none of them are easy. So we're going to have to figure out how to move forward if we're looking for a big solution. But in the interim, we're trying to do some other things to kind of supplement that.
May I have 15 seconds, or should I have a second round?
Why don't you take a second round?
Okay, I will.
Okay. All right, Greg.
Yeah, so I'm looking at asset sales, but I'm also looking at how much surplus property do we have in our inventory? Not just downtown, in general, in the whole city.
Well, I mean, you own property all over town, and none of it is surplus at this time. So that's an actual process you would go through to say, we don't need this property anymore, we're willing to surplus it. And you could do that, I believe, on any piece of property that you own, unless it's been deeded permanently to us for some reason.
There's a few of our parks that have some deed restrictions on them from the benefactors that deeded them to this. That's a outlier that we, of course, want to look at if you had identified a specific piece of property that you would want to surplus.
So, for instance, if we wanted to sell a certain percentage of park land to raise those funds, that would be an option for us to do. It's not restricted except for deed restrictions on certain things that have been donated, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Would there be, and if it was purchased with, lands that have been purchased with land and water conservation funds or with bonds or something, we would need to repay those.
Right, so that's why the specific pieces of property that you look at to surplus, we'd want to get you the specific information. So the park bonds is a perfect example. That money, if we were to sell that, has to go back to the park bond fund, so it wouldn't actually become a.
Couldn't fund,
Correct,
City Hall.
correct.
And what would happen if we altered the plan with regard to the farmer's market and placed it somewhere else on the park blocks and go into a private partnership development for, say, housing on the same site as the proposed City Hall?
I mean, that is.
I mean,
so-
I'm thinking we
What you're
could
saying is if
raise
we-
funds in a joint effort.
So don't do the farmer's market on the butterfly lot, do it someplace else. That's what you're
Somewhere
asking.
else within that,
Within the park blocks.
within the park
Yeah,
blocks.
I think that would be, we would want to talk to our stakeholders, the two markets. I don't think we'll have enough space to coexist in that. So you would be, I'm guessing, just based on I've been in a lot of conversations with the farmer's market over the years, they would probably be moving locations with that if they don't have a permanent home there.
I'd also want to look at the deed. We bought, as the Urban Renewal Agency, purchased half of that lot with the funds, and it was part of the purchase and sale agreement with the county, that the way it was sold and the way they agreed to put in funds for it. So they were a partner in that as part of the Lane County Farmers Market component. So, and that had to do with using that piece of property. So before we explore that, I just want to make sure, because we have some IGAs and we have some MOUs with the county on all of that.
I got you. We're tied up 2 ways, 12 ways to Sunday. Okay.
We'd at least want to look at all those
Yeah.
ties.
How many we have to untie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chris?
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation and the challenges that we have in front of us. This is not an easy thing to do. Could you tell me right now how much is currently in the facility reserve?
In the City Hall Fund?
Yeah.
There's 15.5 million.
15.5, okay. And to kind of follow up with some of the other points that have been raised, these are a couple of ideas under asset sales, but I would want to explore what other kind of possibilities there are, taking into consideration all the possible constraints there might be. But I would definitely want to take a look at it just to see what we would have available to us. I remember we talked a little bit about that when we were looking at options for park funding, when we were doing the park funding, and we looked at what some of those assets might be. Not to sell off any existing parks, but there's a lot of empty space that's undeveloped, and we might look at some of those. The capital transfer allocations could raise a fairly significant amount of money, but once again, you have to take the trade-off to what that impact might be on the rest of the deferred maintenance and repair. I think it's something we just have to look at more closely, because, maybe we don't go for the full amount, maybe we go for some variation. What I'm looking at is how do you cobble together combinations of funding that might get you to a closer goal. So I don't want to defer a lot of maintenance, but maybe there is some balance that we could look at in there that could generate some amount of money. From what you just described, we could take $3 million out of the reserve for revenue shortfall and still be at 5% if we did that today. Because it's at 16, we could go to 13.
Nothing else changing.
I'm generalizing, but you see where I'm trying to kind of create the larger concept rather than the specific dollars. I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that if we want to have a city hall, we have to realize that there will be a scale implication. We're already talking about what the scale implications are. We absolutely have to talk about phasing, and Will's already mentioned that there's some phasing in there, but even in the city hall, there may be some phasing opportunities. As we bring in revenue, we may be able to phase portions of it. I don't know what that would look like, but we should at least consider how we can phase things. And then the final one that I really want to emphasize is we have to recognize it will be a stretch. There is no way we can do a pain-free city hall. It's just impossible. And so we can say, well, let's figure out a way we can do it and nobody gets hurt and nobody has to come up with any new revenue and everything is going to be fine. That's impossible. So we have to say, where are we willing to stretch? What within these revenue sources are we willing to be comfortable? That's not really the right word. Accepting of stretching if we really want to get to a city hall. So maybe that's really the fundamental question. Do we want a city hall badly enough that we're willing to look at some of these things and be willing to do some stretching in order to get there? And I think that is a worthwhile conversation as we try to say how much money could we get to?
Okay. Alan?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Chris just said. I'm not interested in selling parklands either to do this. The dollars that were the net proceeds of the swap, which was around $3 million, where's that land? Is that part of the 15.5 million?
Yes, yes, and they're in the City Hall Fund.
Yeah, so it was like we ended up with the two didn't equal in value, so we ended up with an extra 3 million. Okay. On the farmers market, when we did do the sale exchange with the Lane County, can you refresh memory on what Lane County offered up as part of the monies to help do that? And is that included in the money that we have, the 4.5 million?
You
Is
can
that just
I could, yes, so that, The county offered approximately $940,000, I think is the number, with half of that, or $500,000 as cash, and the rest as either cash or in kind, some sort of in kind exchange. And that $0.94 million is included in the assets that we're existing funds that we're assuming.
That's part of the 4.5 million approximately.
That's part of when Councilor Clark asked how much do we have. So we have, out of that 25 million, we have approximately $13 million, and that's included in that. That's one of the pieces in addition to the urban renewal
Oh, okay.
that we would count as existing. Yep.
You know, I've been involved in over my career all these kind of projects like this, and not a single one of them was a simple project, and the financing was always complicated, and as this one's going to be, nothing's going to be simple. My expectation is that out of this grouping, we will start to pull together several different options that pull together the amount of money that we need. I'm encouraged by this conversation because there is, I think it makes it very doable to come up with the several $1 million that we will need to be able to build a city hall. We might have to scale back what we're going to do, but I think that what we've seen here is that there's several options that are very doable. Not any one option's going to make it there, but maybe a cob pulling together a whole bunch of different ones.
Betty?
Thank you. My question is, can we transfer funds? That's one of my questions, from other things.
Can you just give an example of something?
Well, yes. For one thing, I think we don't need to do anything to the park blocks immediately. Can we transfer the funds that we've set aside for that to the City Hall Fund?
Not without a plan amendment.
But we could do that,
Yes.
yes.
You could amend the plan,
Yeah.
and then, yes.
If we said it, we could do it. So I think, when I was in Nepal back in 2000, I learned some things from them. They're a very poor country, but they do one thing at a time. Finish that before they start something else. And I think that we really need to concentrate on the City Hall and postpone other things. We could transfer money. We could also transfer the money that the $9 million we're talking about for a quiet zone could be put into it. We could try to raise the lodging, the transient room tax, put some of that in. And then another thing I wondered about, I don't know how much money it gets, but if you were to sell plaques or pavers with people's names on them in memory of somebody or in tribute to someone, what kind of money do you get from that? Like the county, we have that out here on the Free Speech Plaza. Library has lots of things with people's names on them. The Holt Center has those bricks with people's names. They're fading, but we could do it better maybe. But I wonder how much money we could make from things like that, from people.
We could definitely look back at the library and the Holt Center. I think we could probably look back and get a sense of what was generated and kind of scale that over time to get an idea, or even just look at some of our other partners that have recently built to see where they've been able to gather.
And we could ask people if they want an impressive city hall for our city, maybe people would like to donate and just be put on a list of people who, not a big plaque by themselves, but a list of people who donated. And that seems to work lots of places. So could we transfer I'd really like to know if we could, I think we should, there's nothing wrong with the park blocks right now.
When you talk about the park blocks, you're talking about the two southern blocks, not the
Yes.
butterfly lot where the farmer's market's going, right?
No,
Okay,
That's not a park right now.
right. It's still considered, I think we're thinking of that as,
I know it was originally. also was originally a farmer's market many years ago. Someone sent me once a rubbing of the marker that used to be there that said it was a farmer's market. I gave it to Kitty Piercy. I don't know where it is now, but
So I'm only clarifying that because I want to make sure that I'm understanding, when you say there's no need to do the park blocks, you're not saying there's no need to do the farmer's market.
it doesn't have to be before City Hall. It's working now. But what I was talking about specifically was the park blocks.
Okay.
As long as you have grass and trees, a place to sit, and a restroom, you've got it. The parks are perfectly good as they are. And a city does need a city hall. And I think we should concentrate on that to start with. And as for the farmer's market, that drawing that was in the newspaper has created a lot of concern. People saying it's ugly, too big,
We've heard that. From some.
have you ever heard that?
From some. Not from everybody.
And how about the 9 million for the quiet zone? Could we transfer that to City Hall?
I don't remember exactly the funding source for that, and it's.
Part of it's urban renewal and parts
No,
just.
well, it's Riverfront Urban Renewal. So
Yeah.
a portion of that, and then some of the
Some of
funding
it's
is
general
coming
funds, I
from.
think.
I don't think there's
Don't think
There's
so?
only a very, very small amount of general fund, and it's being utilized outside of the district to create the safety fencing. It's less than $500,000. I think it's like 300. Yeah. And then the remainder of that, I'm not sure. I think it's designated for roads, and I just would have to look at that if it's flexible.
There's
Yeah.
far, far less likelihood that any outside of the very small general fund money that's being used would be able to be used for something like the city hall.
I think it makes sense to concentrate on one thing, which should be a city hall for the city.
Eddie, I'll give you a second round, okay?
Did I go over?
Yes, you did.
I'm catching it from Ellen. Thank you.
I probably took some of her
Okay,
time.
Jennifer and then Emily.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think City Hall is very important, but I think we need to be mindful that there are lots of other projects in our city that are important too. And we want to not be sacrificing those other projects. We're a very, our city can be very complex, and I think we have a lot of great staff and a lot of great people, and I think we can do more than one project at a time. I feel like we have that capacity, and I certainly would not want to sell parkland. Like, that would not be something I would at all consider personally. I think, and the quiet zone, those things are very important, just as our city hall is also important. Will, I really like the idea of phasing. I think that's smart, considering our current situation and the money, and focusing on the city hall and then that first, I guess, the farmer's market block, whatever we want to call that, and then the leveraging the work that's going to be already being done. That seems very smart to me. The farmer's market says 11 million. That's, I assuming, the structure and fixing the facility. Do you know how much the structure itself is?
I don't know offhand. No, it's no, I would say it's probably close to half, but I don't know.
So when the county gave us the $940,000, what was the expectation of what we would be like the level? Do we need to build that particular structure, and what were the expectations from the county for getting that money?
I think mostly the expectations were that they've had a long history as the Lane County Farmers Market, and they wanted there to be some acknowledgement of that, and also some acknowledgement of the Skinners. And so I think there were some specifics in there around having a type of, we stopped calling it a memorial and started calling it more of a dedication. So I think it was mostly a contribution, but with an understanding that we would capture the history of the space and the relationship.
You look like you're going to say something.
No, I agree with all that. And it was also to make sure that everybody was around the table in the discussions around it. That's largely what the IGA talked about, was making sure that everybody had a seat at the table and talking about. But there was certainly no promise of any specific.
I'm not saying we should necessarily cut it. I just wanted to be clear about what we were, what their expectation was giving us that money, and what kind of wiggle room we had with that. I have like so many numbers written on here through this, so I don't suppose it would be capable for you to send us an email kind of summarizing, like we have this much from this, because I've got 12 to 13 million written down here, and then somewhere else I have 9.7, and if we could get an email just highlighting all the numbers that you told us, because I feel like I may have doubled some of these numbers in all my notes, and that would be really helpful for me.
All right, Emily.
Thank you very much. I agree with Betty that although we could make the park blocks fit in with its new stuff and be nicer, that we don't need to right now. Another thing I'm concerned about with the park blocks is that 5.2 million is for park and other open space. And working with Eric Brown on downtown, we've talked about the area in front of the Holt Plaza and the conference center that then leads to park blocks, that leads to Kesey, that leads to the library bus station corner. And I don't want those 4 areas to be left out, or 3 areas, from the 5.2 million, because they're important also, and we're trying to make a continuity from the river on up to Willamette Street. So those 3 spots are really important to me. I can't really get my head around taking money from other projects to put into City Hall. How do we determine, we just decide which ones are more important? Is a City Hall more important than a shelter? When I talk to people, they really aren't screaming for a City Hall, but they're yelling loudly for a shelter. So that makes me a little bit nervous that we're going to start shifting money around. The idea that we would use urban renewal dollars or make the urban renewal district last longer, when we said, I saw it happen, we wouldn't use it for City Hall. I can't vote for that. We just can't be that wishy-washy. We have to work with what we decided, unless it's really bad. So I'm just a little cautious about all of these things. The farmer's market is 11 million, and the park blocks is up to 9 million, but we only have 5.2 for green space from urban renewal. Where's the rest of that 9 million coming from for park blocks?
That's a project cost. That's not.
Oh, it's what it costs, not what we have.
Correct.
Okay, so, and farmer's market would cost 11 million, and we don't have that much either.
Right.
And then the right-of-way is the street in between those two. So that ups to $25 million. And what do we have, 9.2?
So in all, we have 12 to 13. I don't.
So we need 12 to 13 just to do the parks and the farmer's market before we even get to City Hall.
Yes. And the right-of-way, it includes 8th Avenue. It also includes the section of Oak that runs through the town square and all of Park Street as well.
Well, we don't have enough money to do all these projects. I mean, that's just the reality of it. We can move things around and sell Laurelwood, but those are some big changes that are going to get a lot of action we'll have to deal with. So I'm concerned about going ahead lickety-split, even though we're really far behind. Thanks.
Okay, I have Mike, Betty, and Alan for second rounds.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to address Betty's questions and comments here real quickly. It requires a 6 to 9 month plan amendment in order to use the monies designated for the farmers market and the parks for City Hall, correct?
Correct.
And then it would be subject to a public vote, right?
If it was referred to,
Right.
Only if it's referred.
Right.
So we have that concern with that plan, and I think most of us know pretty clearly that it would be referred and it would likely fail. I want to ask a few more questions about parking. So what Denny was talking about was essentially there's some places here and there that we're looking at that are surface oriented and other places that people own parking that we're trying to make use of. But we're not creating new parking in any plan, are we? As we're taking apart old parking, right?
We're not creating, on balance, there'll be a little bit of parking around the City Hall park block town square piece, but it'll be far less than what's there now.
On
right?
street?
We're taking out
Is that
the
what you mean?
butterfly lot. There'll be some, but it's not, I mean, it is definitely reducing the parking right here and trying to offset that by buying some spaces and securing spaces in some of the existing parking garages that have
Cool,
already
I'm
been
glad
built.
you brought that up because there's an opportunity. I would say that we talked about previously that digging it out, it's about $90,000 per space, right? Do you know how many spaces are in the 6th and Oak County underground lot and surface lot per floor? Anybody?
Not off the top of my head.
Because if that's, I would think that's probably more than a couple hundred, but I don't know. In any event, that space, as everybody knows, was built to withstand 4 more stories on top of it. And a public-private partnership, I think, would be just a fantastic place for riverfront, for downtown downtown market district, and the park blocks and the farmers markets. Additional need on parking as more people come down. Interestingly, one of the owners of quite a lot of parking in our downtown texted me the other day and said for that $90,000 per parking place, they have 237 parking places that they'd sell us for $90,000 each, and they'd throw in a 100,000 square foot building for free. When we're talking about relative costs to what we're doing, we should really be talking about them. Thank you.
Okay, Betty, Alan, and Chris, and I just want to prompt everyone about time because we have another work session as
I
well.
didn't ever hear where that place is. Oh, hey, back to that. I don't know where I was now. I really, I'm dumbfounded, yes. I'm back at EWEB. I think, picking up on what Mike was talking about before, people are not going to stop driving. If they can't park downtown, they won't come downtown. And the parking is getting more and more congested. The overpark, where I go a lot, is almost impossible. Now, and it's also losing money incidentally, because the gates aren't working. That's beside the point. But if we take away parking, but I did hear that we might cut down the lanes on 7th and put in parking, angled parking.
We've studied that, but we don't have a current plan to do that, unless you know of a different one.
There's not a plan. It's in study phase.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's a possibility. I don't know how much that would add, but it sounds like a good idea to slow down, cut through speeding traffic and provide parking spaces. People could get there. As far as taking months to change the plan, we're not starting City Hall any sooner than that anyway. So what's wrong with taking 6 or 8 months to change?
It's really a council policy decision if you want to open up the urban renewal plan to either add a project or extend the length of time or expand the district to include a convention center and parking. All of that is totally your policy decision.
Adding time is just a no-starter. We've done that too many times, and I think we promised we wouldn't do that again. There have been promises made before, though, and broken. So who cares? Thank you.
All right, Alan.
The Comcast dollars, that wasn't one of the 13.
Right, so there was another,
There's
actually.
a whole other fund of money sitting out there.
So there was another handout that
Unfettered.
we went through that talked about the Comcast dollars in relation to the reserve for revenue shortfall. And the 15.5 remaining in the Comcast dollars are actually part of the current reserve, which is at 16.6, so, correct.
And then you are the urban renewal dollars, and the promise that we made, correct me if I'm wrong, was that, I think I voted against this, but that we would not use that expansion and that increase in indebtedness, those dollars for City Hall, which is different than if you did it, if you added an extension to that, that would be a different set of money. So what we said was those dollars that we dedicated towards park blocks and farmers market would not be used for City Hall, but that would be distinct from another extension of the urban renewal district to get a different set of money, correct?
I'm trying to remember off the exact language in the urban renewal plan. I think that if you were to add, the way the downtown urban renewal plan is written is it says the dollars can only be used for the identified projects in the plan. So you would need to amend the plan to add the city hall as a project, and you would want to, at the same time, amend the language that would read internally and consistently about not spending any money on city hall. So you would, if you wanted to spend dollars on city hall, it has an urban renewal plan amendment is going to be necessary regardless.
Right, and including if we extended the life of it, you'd have to go through the whole process anyway, so you'd be in the same ballpark. But you could say those monies were for those projects and this new monies for the city hall, and keep them distinct and keep that promise. But and I thought that whole expansion at that time would get referred, and it was tried, but it didn't work, and so it wasn't. So I was wrong on that, and I don't know what the outcome will be this time around either. The county parking structure that Mike was referring to, can we look at that a little bit closer? We've been talking about that as if it was a certainty that we could add more things on there. That parking lot was built a long time ago, and it had a different structure to it. There was a lot of stuff said during the old city hall process that wasn't true, and so I'd like to make sure that that's actually a good option, that it's doable, that we could add to it in today's conditions and the condition of that facility. It's a great spot to go up. And if it was built for that and we can do it, that would be a great option, but I want to make sure that that's even doable, because it doesn't necessarily track that 20 plus years later that we can actually do that. Now, finally, I think, all the stuff that we have on the table for all this work is actually some really cool stuff. I think it's a really investment in City of Eugene, and I think the City of Eugene is worth it. And I think thinking small about this isn't the way that the council should move. I think we should try to do what we possibly can, being fiscally prudent, but think big. And let's make this area in here a really special place to be.
Right, and Chris.
Thank you. Just some clarifying questions for me. You say you've got 13 million identified for the town square project. Does that 13 million include any money from the facility reserve?
No. So for the 12 to 13 million would be for the farmers market and park blocks part of the town square, and I know there's money from Public Works, there's the county money, there's the urban renewal money, maybe forgetting something, but nothing from facilities.
Nothing from facilities. So that 15.5 is separate.
Correct.
So we could do 13 million worth of the park blocks, and it wouldn't affect the 15.5 million that we have for City Hall. So those pots are still there. So the competition is for coming up with the rest of the money for either one of those projects. So we've got 13. We got 15.5, and then we figure out how we come up with the rest for either one of those projects, whether we phase it, prioritize it, however we want to do it. So then, to the topic of the urban renewal district, I agree, we built it in that it's going to end. We're not going to renew it. But within that, I think it was 18.5 million or something like that, which we originally funded in that urban renewal district, divided among 6 projects. One of which was the LCC Downtown Center, $6 million, which we've spent, $500,000 to buy the building. We could consider what our options were with the remaining $5.5 million for the LCC Downtown Center. I'm hearing you, we would need to do a revision, but it wouldn't extend it. and it wouldn't increase its indebtedness. It would be moving money within the existing 8.5 million, if I'm thinking. It would take 6 months, however long it would take. I'm wanting to look at the elements within it. Fiber, we've already pretty much spent that money. That money's gone and it's done and it was well spent. Park blocks was part of that money, and that's also money we want to definitely retain and hold on to. But the LCC Center, that's money we might want to look at, being able to take at least some of that money, even if it was 3 or 4 million. I'm in a cobbling mode, so I'm looking for how I can begin to build slowly to get to where we want to go. I'm perfectly willing to look at reopening the Urban Renewal District plan so that we don't extend its term, we don't increase its indebtedness, but we look at rearranging some of the funding within that. It's a number of years later, and things have changed. And we may want to look at how we might want to reconfigure it, but still be true to what the original intent was of that Urban Renewal District. Just take a look at it. And I think that way we can stay true to the promise we made, but we can look at how we might better utilize that $18.5 million that we put into that in the first place.
Okay, I know Mike wants a third, but I'm watching the clock, and I'm just wanting to make sure that we, hang on one second. I just want to make sure that we wrap this up in a way that it's clear to staff.
Yeah.
So,
Well, so far, what I have kind of heard from this is, I mean, right now, we already have council direction to be moving forward on the schematic design of both of these projects. So I am definitely hearing a desire to see kind of a cobbled together possibility that you could talk more about. I think there's still a question to me, even to cobbled together. There's still a question to me about whether that includes a phasing of the park blocks and the farmer's market. So, or do you want a cobbled together city hall and full town square project? I'm trying to get to a cobbler here so we can do pie again.
Yes.
So I think for us, I think we just keep going forward. I think if it sounded like people were going to say, you know what, let's not do the south side of the park blocks, then we would probably want to stop work on that sooner than later, because we are spending real money on that, getting it designed.
right. So I have, Emily, do you have a question about
It's
that
quick,
specifically?
yeah. If there's a possibility we're going to phase, why are we continuing with the design and spending that money right now? You know,
That's
'cause
my point,
we
because this is the
directed-
first time we've talked about it.
Okay, I'm concerned about that. If we're going to pause, then let's pause with the spending right now. That's it.
So I don't want to rush this conversation, but I do want to give timely clarity. So it sounds like that we ultimately will have to give clearer direction on the whole park blocks, whether we want to phase that and just focus on the farmer's market and the city hall block and postpone working on and I don't know whether we're ready to give you direction on that or not. Doesn't look like it. And then there's clearly a conversation about the urban renewal district
Yeah.
and what that might look like, and then what some of these other pieces, more specifics. And I'm with Jennifer. I now need a new.
I know, it's a lot of information. We'll figure out now, just based on this, how to give you more. So we don't need you to give us direction today on the phasing, but I'm agreeing with what you're saying. It would be great to have that direction before you go on break. And one of my concerns has been 2 of you are not going to be here pretty shortly. I think Councilor Taylor and Councilor Evans are going to be gone the last 2 meetings before we go on break. So we've tried to make it where you're all here as much as possible.
You guys aren't going to be here by phone.
No,
I think,
Probably not.
so we just need to figure out how to do that.
Okay. So are we
I think
we dialed that
we're
in as
okay.
well as we can
Yeah.
do that? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you very much. And I apologize because we have the consolidated plan discussion and we have 20 minutes, so.
One more turn.
Make it quick.
No, we're obviously coming back to this conversation and you can get clarity from staff about anything that will contribute to that next round, okay?
We're going to jump to.
It's just there isn't time. Greg wants it, we're done.
Wednesday.
Okay. I'm going to go to like slide 17 or something. Okay.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to aim for the Twitter version of my presentation this evening. So we get the, great, thank you. Okay, here we go. So I'm the grants manager, and I manage our affordable housing and community development programs, and I'm here to talk with you about the consolidated plan. There's no action required tonight. This is really just an opportunity to hear your feedback, so I'm going to try to make this short so we can get to that. So just real briefly, the scope of the consolidated plan, it sets the priority needs and strategies for the use of federal community development block grant and home investment partnership program funds for a 5-year period. It is a menu, and so really it doesn't have any dollars attached to it, but it does set the menu for what you can do with those resources over a 5-year period. We really, each year, we do an action plan in addition to the consolidated plan, so we're also starting work on the action plan for the first year right now. There are multiple steps in the con plan process. What we're really trying to do is to bring together data, community perspectives, to set the goals and priorities that have to be based on those needs. And here are a couple more schematics just showing you the steps in the process that we've been moving through over the past several months, as well as the various ways that we've tried to engage the community to solicit their opinions and perspectives on these issues. As we look at our community profile, we're seeing moderate growth, a greater share of seniors, greater diversity, slightly decreasing household size, growing median income, and lower unemployment. We're also seeing continuing indicators of poverty and financial hardship among multiple populations. We also take a look at where low-income people live in the community because there are some other ways you can use CDBG funds in those areas. When we think about renter needs, we see that rents are rising much faster than incomes, and this results in greater challenges for people with low incomes. We are also seeing increasing homeowner costs, which also result in greater cost burdens, particularly for homeowners with low incomes. And as part of this analysis, we also use data and community perspectives to take a look at various fair housing issues that relate to protected classes in the community and consider ways that we can better address discrimination issues. All of this results in a set of proposed priority needs that relate to specific populations and issues. We did take a hard look at this. These are the same priority needs that we had in 2015 and felt that these really covered the range of needs within the community. As we get to the strategic use of CDBG and home funds, CDBG, it's an old program with a broader set of uses, but it's fairly complicated to use. Home is a narrow program that's even more complicated to use. But it's important to keep these things in mind when we're thinking about the proposed strategies as we're trying to fit the needs of the community with the strategies with what we can actually use these funds to do. So when we get to proposed affordable housing strategies, it's really important to kind of think of these as buckets. And so these are broad. There are a lot of different kinds of activities that can fit within these 4 categories. And as we looked at these categories, these are the same proposed strategies that we used in the 2015 plan. We really felt that they covered the breadth of need, and there are really more minor changes that we're considering at a more finite level. When we think about the first goal, increase the supply of affordable housing, this is the biggest goal where we've put the most resources in the past 5 years. Here are examples of 3 projects and how we've combined different sources of funding to help cover gaps and make these projects possible. I do want to note that one of them is permanent supportive housing, the Commons on MLK, and then the Polk Street Apartments is focused on a special needs population. For community development strategies, you can only use CDBG funds for community development strategies. And the focus areas are human services and shelter, job creation, and improvements to public areas in low-income areas. And again, here are 3 examples of how we've used these funds to support human service operations and capital facilities. I would note that you're looking at a former bank, auto center, and motel that have all been converted for use as human service facilities. And then lastly, with the fair housing strategies, we're exploring a variety of ways, both through the creation of housing opportunities, as well as fair housing outreach and education, fair housing complaints and hotline services, as well as renter protections and other regulatory changes to better support protected classes. And then lastly, these are all the different plans that are supported in different ways by actions within the consolidated plan. I don't have time to go into that right now, but there are relationships, and we do think about how this plan interconnects with other plans, as well as the Human Service Plan and other plans. Oops, sorry. So key dates, we are getting ready to release the draft plan. We will hold a final consolidated plan advisory committee and public hearing on April 1st, and then come back to you on April 27th to discuss both the consolidated plan and the one-year action plan. And then it's due to HUD on May 15th. I'm happy to take any questions.
That was incredibly fast summary of a lot of data. I have Betty. Go for it, Betty.
Just have a question. What do you mean by fair housing?
So fair housing is essentially when you are looking at specific protected classes under federal fair housing law. And so it can include people with disabilities, families with children, et cetera. And so what HUD asks us to do is to look at the barriers that are experienced by those protected classes and then think about ways that we can help to affirmatively further fair housing.
Okay, I thought we already had laws that took care of that. A long time ago, 40 years ago in Springfield, Illinois, I was a group that started a fair housing effort, and that was racial discrimination, but by banks and by other ways that, and I thought we were beyond that, so I just wondered what you meant by fair housing.
There's still definitely quite a bit of people who do experience housing discrimination, and so there is a variety of ways in which we're trying to help address that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris.
Thank you. I've had the opportunity to work on the committee that's trying to put this together. And unlike the one we did in 2015, which was a great plan, this one has a lot more at stake in terms of what the aspirations are and what the strategies we want to try to put together. So it was very important that we collect very good information about the community in order to be able to develop these strategies. And we're really moving, I think, very well. And what we bring back to you, I think, will be the result of a lot of study. Could you go to the very last slide? And I wanted to mention this one. There we go. Yes. And I just wanted to mention this one very quickly because I was doing some research on what is the federal poverty level in 2020. And if you look at that first column, very low income, 30% of our local average medium income, that's basically the poverty level. So there are a lot of people in this community who are at 30% of the AMI, that's what they're earning, which qualifies them at the federal poverty level. And so if we talk about housing, you have to take into account there's an enormous number of people who are not earning enough money to pay for housing. And so we have created a bigger and bigger and bigger balloon at the bottom of the housing market because nobody's moving up. They don't have enough money to move up. And that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we can't build our way out of that. We have to figure out other strategies. Part of, I think, the work that's being done on the consolidated plan is to help us understand how that dynamic is working. And that might help us to understand what are some strategies we can put in place to try to get people moving up through the housing cycle rather than just all collecting at the bottom because they don't have enough income to afford anything better. So that's a very important slide, and it's perhaps more important than we might think on the surface. But that tells us the gasoline that is running our economy, the wages people are earning, are way below where they ought to be. And we need to figure out strategies for that as well. That's my new drumbeat.
Okay. Greg and then Alan.
No, I was just going to respond to Betty. You are correct. There was the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 that basically never worked. Most of the cities in this country have become more segregated than they were before. We don't necessarily have a racial problem here yet, but the makings of that are beginning as we have more and more Latino families moving in with lower incomes in areas that poverty can be concentrated in. But, you know, as far as that's concerned, you know, the Federal Fair Housing Act, in my opinion, has never really worked.
Alan?
Yeah, I think the operative word there is yet, because if we don't do anything different, we're going to be ahead there. So on slide 11, 12, there's the 21% of Eugene residents have incomes below poverty line. Is that the same poverty line that Chris was talking about? So if you go to slide 14, I think there's some really telling. Can you go to slide 14? 14. Renter housing needs. There's some really telling statistics there that are really disturbing. We know that 51% of Eugene households, which is 34,000 folks, are renters, but the median rent is almost $1,400, and it's gone up almost 50% in the last 10 years. And 55% of Eugene renters have moderate or severe housing burden. That is a staggering number. 63% are low income. That's 21,000 people own that first call or in that first column of income, which presents a huge problem, including the housing burden for those folks. It's like almost 80% of those folks are housing burden, meaning they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Some are spending way more than that, 50, 75% in some cases. That just kind of lays this landscape for how we've gotten into the missing middle housing and the affordable housing crisis we have. Great job on doing the presentation. Can we rent you out to the people who want? So we shifted from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. We also had the rental. I don't know the title of the group. The rental housing group that's looking at things about renters and renters' rights. What's the name of that group? And what's the status of it?
Task Force 3. It's the
Task Force 3.
Task Force of the housing policy.
And what's the status of that?
So the Renter Protections Committee has been meeting for multiple months and has been working through a variety of recommendations. Some of those recommendations relate to possible uses of Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars. And we have time scheduled after the break to discuss the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in a work session. So I'll be sharing those recommendations with you at that point in time. Some of the discussion topics are also regulatory, and we're starting to move into the regulatory conversations at this point in time.
Okay, so we're going to see a report soon of draft recommendations on both the CET and the regulatory side.
Yes, so the CET will come first, and we haven't set a specific date for the regulatory.
Will the report be both?
So we will discuss the things that involve money as part of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund conversation, and we'll separate the regulatory portion because those really are more complicated in many ways and involve possible changes to code.
Right, and ordinance, potentially. All right, yeah, good. I'm looking forward to that conversation. I think that's going to be very important as we move forward and try and tackle affordable housing and missing middle housing especially.
Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I was trying to find this article's author here that I saw this morning. That was really interesting. So let's start here. on this page, you're talking about the costs for a Eugene renter and how relatively bad off they are to try to rent, how challenging it is. But this whole slide assumes an individual person is renting a place, right? And all those numbers are calculated off a household of one, right?
No, these are all Eugene households. So when you look at the first slide, when you say all Eugene renters, that we have 34,000 households in Eugene who are renters. And that includes single person, two person, three person, 5-person households.
And so with that previous slide you showed where like 6 people, 30% at 6 people was $36,000. So it's weighted for the dollars in each household?
This is really HUD's, what they say, you know, when you're looking at rent limits for projects, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, that one.
Yes. So when we're using federal funds, so
Right.
what HUD does is they will
Yeah, no, I mean,
adjust it for house size. So they're two very different things.
I know, but I was just saying the calculation for what is burdened by household size is interesting relative to the numbers at the end. And I was under the impression that they weren't apples and apples. I thought they were apples and oranges. But I'm hearing you say that they are, and that's awesome. The more important piece of the information to me was this. And I was trying to make a stronger case for it. There's an article, and I wish I could remember the author's name. I want to say it was David Brock, but I'm not sure. David Brooks, I don't know. It was online today about how the real problem isn't missing middle housing so much as, although it is that between 1950 and 1965 in our country, we focused on building an entire economy and an entire structure of neighborhoods for a nuclear family. And we don't live that way anymore, by and large. We just don't live that way. And for about, 10,000 years of human history before 1950, it was multi-generational families were the norm. And now we've atomized down to this idea that one adult should be able to afford to live alone. And I'm saying that rather than spend all the money and build all the things, I think we ought to be talking more about our expectation set with regard to how we live culturally and what's built in our surroundings. Because what we've built isn't right for the culture we live in today. And yes, it does involve what we build tomorrow, but it also involves our expectations, especially when it comes to low-income folks. When it comes to subsidized housing, we're building in the most expensive kind of reality rather than saying we expect multiple adults to live together if we're going to subsidize it. And I think that's part of the discussion we should be having. Thank you.
Hey, anybody else need a moment? Okay, thank you. I just have to say that I said this morning, this is the best report ever. I really think this consolidated report is so interesting and it's so full of information. It's such a valuable kind of summary of where we are at this moment in time and incredibly helpful. So I just really want to thank you for that work because I think it's very useful to us. And we are adjourned until 7:30.